You stole from me. My grandfather's voice echoed across the Thanksgiving table, his fingers stabbing the air toward my face. Everyone stopped eating. 30 relatives stared at me like I was a criminal. But I didn't defend myself. I didn't cry. I just looked him in the eye and said 5 words that would destroy his perfect golden boy forever. I have no idea about it. Before I tell you how those 5 words unraveled a decade of lies and left my cousin begging for mercy in a courtroom, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever been accused of something you didn't do at a family gathering. I want to hear every story. I'm Emma and I'm 32 years old. I work as a middle school librarian in a small town in Ohio. I've never been arrested. I've never stolen anything in my life. I still return shopping carts to the corral even when it's raining. But on Thanksgiving 2023, my grandfather stood up at dinner and told everyone I was a thief. Let me take you back 3 weeks before that dinner. Back to when everything was still normal. Or at least what passed for normal in the Bennett family. My grandfather, George Bennett, was 78 years old. He'd built a successful plumbing supply business from nothing back in the 1970s. By the time I was born, he owned 3 locations across the state. He wasn't rich, but he was comfortable. And he was proud. So proud. George had 2 grandchildren. Me and my cousin Brandon. Brandon was 2 years older than me, and from the day he was born he was the golden child. George loved him with a fierce, blinding devotion that left no room for anyone else. When we were kids, George took Brandon fishing every Saturday. He taught him how to fix cars, how to negotiate deals, how to shake hands like a man. When Brandon graduated high school, George paid for his entire college tuition. When Brandon dropped out after 1 semester to start a contracting business, George loaned him $50,000, no questions asked. I got a card on my birthday. Sometimes. I stopped expecting fairness from George a long time ago. My mom, his daughter, had married a public school teacher. George never forgave her for not marrying someone wealthier. So I became invisible. The granddaughter who didn't matter. But I didn't hate George. I just accepted it. I built my own life. I got my degree, got my job, bought a small house with my husband, Jack. We were happy. We didn't need George's approval. Then 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, George called me. It was a Tuesday night. I was grading book reports when my phone rang. Emma, he said, his voice rough and tired. I need to talk to you. Is everything okay, Grandpa? I asked. No, he said. It's not. I need you to come to the house tomorrow. Alone. My stomach dropped. George never asked me to visit. Ever. The next day I drove to his house. It was a big colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch. I'd spent so many childhood holidays there, always feeling like a guest instead of family. George opened the door. He looked older than I remembered. His hands shook slightly as he gestured for me to sit in the living room. I'm dying, he said, flat and blunt. I blinked. What? Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Grandpa, I'm so sorry. He waved his hand, cutting me off. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because I need to get my affairs in order. I'm updating my will. I nodded slowly. I assumed this conversation was about letting me know I'd get nothing. Maybe a lamp or some old books. That was fine. I didn't expect anything. I'm leaving the business to Brandon, George said. He's going to run it after I'm gone. Of course he was. Brandon, who'd failed at every business venture he'd ever started. Brandon, who still borrowed money from George every few months. But I'm also setting up a trust for you. George continued. I stared at him. For me. $200,000, he said. It'll be managed by my lawyer. You'll get payments every year. It's not much, but it's something. I know I wasn't always fair to you, Emma. This is my way of making it right. I felt tears burn my eyes. It wasn't about the money. It was the fact that he'd finally seen me. After 32 years, I existed to him. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded stiffly. The lawyer will contact you after I'm gone. Don't tell anyone. Especially not Brandon. He doesn't need to know. I promised I wouldn't. I left his house feeling lighter than I had in years. That feeling lasted exactly 3 weeks. Thanksgiving dinner at George's house was a tradition. Every year the whole family gathered around his massive dining room table. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone. This year felt different. George looked frail. He sat at the head of the table, barely touching his food. My aunt was fussing over him. Brandon sat to his right, loud and confident, telling some story about a job he'd just landed. I was at the far end of the table with Jack. We were invisible as usual. Then halfway through dinner, George stood up. The room went silent. "I have something to say," George announced, his voice shaking with anger. Everyone stopped eating. Forks hung in midair. George's eyes locked on me. "Someone in this family is a thief." My stomach twisted. 2 weeks ago, George continued, I discovered that $25,000 is missing from my personal account. Money I've been saving for medical bills. It was transferred out electronically. Gasps echoed around the table. "And I know who did it," George said. His finger pointed directly at me. "Emma." The room exploded. My aunt shrieked. My uncle started yelling. Brandon stood up, his face red with fake outrage. "How could you?" Brandon shouted at me. "He's dying and you steal from him?" I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Everyone was staring at me like I was a monster. "I didn't," I said, my voice barely audible. "I didn't take anything." "Liar," my aunt screamed. "George would never lie." George slammed his hand on the table. "I checked the records, Emma. The transfer was made from a computer at the public library where you work. Your library card was used to log into the system." My heart stopped. "My library? I have no idea about it," I said, my voice hollow. "I didn't do this." "Get out," George said coldly. "Get out of my house. And if you don't return that money by Monday, I'm calling the police." Jack grabbed my arm. "Come on, Emma. Let's go." We left. As we walked to the car, I could hear my family inside tearing me apart, calling me names, saying they always knew I was jealous of Brandon. I sat in the passenger seat, shaking. "I didn't do it," I whispered to Jack. "I swear to God I didn't do it." Jack squeezed my hand. "I know. We're going to figure this out." But as we drove home, one thought kept circling in my mind. If I didn't take the money, then who did? And why did they use my library? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying George's words over and over. The transfer was made from a computer at the library. My library card was used. By 6 a.m. I was dressed and driving to the library. I had keys. I let myself in before anyone else arrived. I went straight to the computer lab. We had 10 public computers that anyone could use. To log in, you needed a library card number. Mine was printed on the card I carried in my wallet every day. But anyone could have written it down. Anyone could have used it. I pulled up the system logs. My hands were shaking as I searched for the date George mentioned. November 10th was 2 weeks ago. There was Computer 7. Logged in at 2:47 p.m. using my card number. I checked the security footage. We had cameras at the entrance and near the computers. I scrolled through the footage from November 10th. At 2:43 p.m. someone walked in. My stomach dropped. Brandon. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low, but I recognized him. He walked straight to Computer 7, sat down and stayed for exactly 12 minutes. Then he left. I sat back in my chair, my mind spinning. Brandon had used my library card number to frame me. He'd stolen the money and made sure the evidence pointed to me. But why? Then it hit me. The will. George had told me about the trust. He told me not to tell anyone, especially Brandon. But what if George had told Brandon about it? What if Brandon knew I was getting $200,000? Brandon was desperate. His business was failing. He owed money everywhere. If I went to prison for theft, George would cut me out of the will. Brandon would get everything. But I had proof now. I had the security footage. I could show George. I could clear my name. Except, if I went to George now, he'd confront Brandon. And Brandon would just lie. He'd say I faked the footage. He'd say I was trying to frame him. George would believe Brandon. He always did. I needed more than footage. I needed Brandon to confess. That's when I came up with the plan. I called George that afternoon. My voice was shaking. "Grandpa," I said. "I need to talk to you. Alone." "If you're calling to lie to me," he started. "I'm not lying," I interrupted. "But I think I know what happened. Can you meet me tomorrow? At the diner on 5th Street? Just you and me." He was silent for a long moment. Then, "Fine. 10 a.m. The next morning I sat in a booth at the diner, my phone recording in my purse. George walked in 10 minutes late, his face hard and cold. "What do you want, Emma?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from me. "I didn't steal from you," I said quietly. "But I think I know who did." His eyes narrowed. "Who?" "Brandon." George's face turned red. "How dare you?" "Listen to me," I said, my voice urgent. I checked the library logs. The transfer was made from a computer there, but I wasn't working that day. I checked the security footage. Brandon was there. He used my card number. "That's impossible," George said. "Why would Brandon steal from me?" "Because he's broke," I said. "And because you told him about the trust you set up for me, didn't you?" George's face went pale. He didn't answer, but I knew I was right. "If I go to prison," I continued, "I lose the trust. Brandon gets everything. That's why he framed me." George stood up abruptly. "I don't believe you." "Then ask him," I said. "Tell him you're going to check his bank records. See how he reacts." George left without another word. I sat there, my heart pounding. I'd planted the seed. Now I just had to wait. 2 days later, George called me. His voice was shaking. "You were right," he whispered. "Oh God, Emma. You were right." "What happened?" I asked. "I told Brandon I was going to review the bank records," George said. "I told him I was going to have my lawyer investigate the transfer. And he broke down. He confessed everything." I closed my eyes. Relief washed over me like a wave. "He said he needed the money," George continued, his voice cracking. "He said his business was failing. He said he panicked. He didn't mean to frame you. He just thought I'd believe him over you." And George had. Of course he had. "I'm so sorry, Emma," George said. "I should have believed you. I should have trusted you." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm cutting him out of the will," George said. "The business, the trust, everything. It's all going to you now." I should have felt victorious. I should have felt vindicated. But all I felt was tired. "Grandpa," I said, "I don't want the business. I'm a librarian. I don't know anything about plumbing supplies." "Then sell it," George said. "Use the money to build the life you deserve. You've earned it." 3 months later, George passed away. The funeral was small. Brandon didn't come. I heard he'd moved out of state, running from the debts he couldn't pay. The business sold for $1.2 million. Combined with the trust and George's other assets, I inherited nearly $1.5 million. I didn't quit my job. I still work at the library. But Jack and I paid off our house. We set up college funds for the kids we want to have someday. We donated $100,000 to the public library system in George's name. And every Thanksgiving I think about that dinner. The moment George pointed at me and called me a thief. The moment I said, "I have no idea about it." Those 5 words saved me. Because I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I didn't beg to be believed. I just stayed calm, gathered evidence, and let the truth do the work. Brandon thought he could frame me because I was invisible. He thought George would never believe me over him. He was right about that. George didn't believe me. But he believed the evidence. And that was enough. Sometimes the best revenge isn't confrontation. It's patience. It's letting liars trap themselves in their own webs. Brandon wanted to erase me from the will, and in the end he erased himself. If this story hit home for you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories of justice and revenge. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been falsely accused? How did you clear your name? I read every single comment. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.